Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we are going to talk about storing state file remotely, which is known as a backend, right? Big backend state file. Consider that we are working in a group, let's say a team of 3 people that have infrastructure related responsibilities, okay, using Terraform. Say one lives in India, one lives in the US, one lives in Canada, but all of us have to work in sync to create Terraform resources. The state file can't be on one person's computer or system. Okay, so the state file, which shows the current state of Terraform infrastructure, has to be stored at a place such that any of the 3 team members have access to it and can use that to create new Terraform resources or to make changes or to destroy Terraform resources. Okay, so that's where state files stored remotely comes in, or Terraform backend comes in. Okay, so as you can see here, I have the code from the previous tutorial where we created an EC2 instance, and of course our provider is AWS, and the variables that we created for that instance as well. Okay, and then remember, for output we printed a public IP. We don't really need the output for this, but let's keep it as it is. Okay, all right. So to start it, we are going to be storing our state file inside an S3 bucket. Okay, so before we even start, I want to create a new resource, which will be an Amazon S3 bucket for this will be for our backend. Okay, all right. It's always good to use the Terraform documentation when you're using this, because sometimes you may write some of the keywords wrong. Like, for instance, you need, for AWS instance, you need AWS underscore instance. You need to get this keyword correct. So let's go back to our Terraform documentation. So I'm going to Google AWS S3 bucket Terraform. Okay, so this will help you to create a bucket. So this is a sample code. I will just copy this and edit it. So paste this here, and I'm gonna call our bucket icon underscore S3, and then for the bucket name, I will call it my icon test bucket. I'll leave the tag as dev, since our EC2 instance is also in the dev environment. Okay, so that's the bucket. Now remember, to be able to store the state file in a bucket, the bucket has to already be existing. Okay, so with this S3 bucket, I'll initialize Terraform. Okay, Terraform is initialized. Let's validate. Okay, so our configuration is valid. Terraform plan. So we have 2 resources that we are adding, and you can clearly see it's the S3 bucket, and the first resource is the EC2 instance. Okay, and in the plan you can clearly see it here. This is the S3, and this is the EC2 instance. Okay, so this, and now you can apply to create our S3 bucket. Terraform apply. Yes. Okay, we have an issue here. So it's saying that creating S3 bucket, API error, access denied. Okay, but it seems the EC2 instance is created. Okay, and it's complete after 33 seconds. So the bucket is still not complete. Now the reason for this is because Remember earlier on in this series, if you go to IAM, the user that we are using for our Terraform is called Terra. Okay. If you open it, if you come to permissions, we only have EC2 full access permission. Okay, we don't have access to S3 bucket. So you need to update this by adding attach directly an S3 permission. For the meantime, let's use full access S3. Next, and add the permission. Okay. Now we have full EC2 and S3 full access. Okay. So if I do now Terraform plan, remember EC2 is already created. Bucket is not done yet. So if I do one more Terraform plan, see that it's one to add, and that one resource to add is the bucket. Okay. Now we have correct permissions, so we should be able to do Terraform apply, and this should work. Okay, so the bucket is successfully being created. So if you go back to S3, you should see our bucket right here, my iQuant test bucket. Good. And if you go to EC2, you should see our EC2 instance running. So Terra EC2. Good. Okay. So now that we have our bucket and the EC2 instance running, now let's talk about bucket versioning. Okay. So versioning S3 bucket. Now this is similar to versioning software. You build one software, you call it say 1.0, the next one you call it 1.1, and then 1.2. That way you can easily roll back previous changes if the current changes that you committed is not running correctly. Okay. Same as bucket. We can do the same for bucket such that the current version will be our 0.1. The next updates we do to it makes our version for the bucket 0.2 and so forth. Okay. So for that, let's go back to our Terraform documentation. And for the AWS S3 bucket options, you should see versioning somewhere. Versioning right here. Now, previously, we could have just used versioning and set it equal to enabled inside the S3 block right here, inside here somewhere. Okay. But that is deprecated, which means in new releases of Terraform, they will stop this. Okay. But then they say that you can use this versioning resource instead. So instead of using it as an option, we are going to rather create a resource for the version. So the resource is AWS S3 bucket versioning. And here is an example. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here, and now we edit it. So for the name, I'll give it iQuant versioning or iQuant bucket versioning, whichever way you use it. For the bucket is S3 buckets, but the name is iQuant S3. So I'll replace this example here with iQuant S3.id, and versioning is enabled. So that's it. Save this. Now we can do Terraform plan. Okay, so you see one more to add, and that one resource is versioning. Okay. Now before we apply it, let's check our S3 bucket. So this is our bucket. If you go to properties, see that bucket versioning is disabled. Okay. So let's apply. Terraform apply. So one is added. So if you go back to our S3 buckets, so bucket, refresh it, open our bucket, properties. Now you see that versioning is enabled. So if you apply the resource, okay. Now that's for the versioning. Next resource we want to add is encryption. So you call it S3 bucket encryption. Okay. Again, let's go back to the Terraform registry. So we've done the versioning. Encryption is also an option. You see right here, server-side encryption configuration. This is also being deprecated as an option, but then you can use this resource to create it. So the same way we did to versioning, let's open that. Okay. This is an example. Copy this, paste it down here, and now we edit. For the name, I'm gonna call this iQuant encrypt. Of course, our bucket name is, if you remember, we called it iQuant S3. And that's exactly the name from the bucket here. Alright. Now for the server-side encryption, we are not using key management store, so we don't need this line. Right, back to the registry for Terraform. So for the SSE algorithm, you have multiple options. Okay, so these are the 3 valid values you can use. Let's use A256 since we don't have KMS set up. All right, so that is it for the encryption. So I'm gonna do Terraform plan. So want to add, and that is encryption. Okay. Terraform apply. One resource added. Okay. So we've added encryption to our bucket. So if I refresh our bucket properties, yep. So you have encryption done. Now let's talk about storing a state file inside of our backend S3 buckets that we've just created, we've versioned and encrypted. For that, I'm gonna create an extra file here and call it backend.tf. Of course, I can also add it to the providers.tf file or even the output.tf file. I just want to keep it separate. Okay, so create this new file and I'll create a Terraform block. Now inside of it, I'll create a backend which is stored in S3 bucket, and for that I need the bucket name, I need a key which is a path to the state file, I need a region, and then I need encryption option. Okay, our bucket name is my iQuant test bucket, so I'll paste it inside this quotation. Then for the key, as I mentioned earlier, this is a path to our state file, so you can call it, let's say, dev/my state file / remember our Terraform state file is terraform.tf state, so terraform.tf state. That's our key. Region, we are using US. Put this in quotes. US East 1. And encryption, say true. Save this, and we should be ready to apply the changes now. Okay. So let me clean the screen. Terraform plan. Okay, so before you do plan, you need to initialize Terraform first. Okay, so let's run Terraform init. Yes. Now this is asking to copy your state file to the bucket that you initialized. Okay, so that is Terraform init. Next, Terraform plan. Okay, now Terraform apply. Let's go back to our S3 bucket. S3 bucket. Okay, so even though the Terraform says no resources were added, when you refresh the bucket, you see that there is a new directory. You have my state file. You have terraform.tfstate. Now this is the remote backend version. Remember this part? That's exactly that. And that's the copy of our Terraform state file. Okay, so take for instance, I delete terraform.tfstate and terraform.tfstate.backup. Take for instance, I delete both of these. Okay, so you clearly can see that there is nothing here anymore. Okay, then let's assume you change the encrypt name to iQuant encryption. Okay, save this, and now if you do Terraform init to initialize, Terraform plan, so there's one to add and one to destroy. Okay, so we are removing the current encryption. Okay, and we are creating a new encryption because I changed the name. Okay, so if I do Terraform apply, so one destroyed, one added. So you can see that still the state file does not appear here, and the reason why is that the state file is now stored in our S3 bucket, which is my iQuant test bucket. If you go in here, you see our state file there. That's why Terraform is still working, even though we don't have state file locally. And so every team member that has access to that state file on S3 is able to make changes to our Terraform resource. Okay. Of course, once you're done, please don't forget to use Terraform destroy to terminate all the resources that you've created. So that will destroy the EC2 instance and some of the other resources, but then one thing you will encounter, it will show up as an error, okay, that it's impossible to delete the S3 bucket, which is our bucket's my iQuant test slash bucket, right? Now the only reason for this is because in AWS, for you to delete a bucket, that bucket has to be empty. Okay, now since our state file is in there, it's not empty, so we can't delete the S3 bucket. Okay, but this shouldn't be a problem because the S3 is free for the AWS free tier account. This shouldn't be a big deal. Or you can go into the AWS management console and empty the buckets, and then do Terraform apply again, and that should delete your AWS S3 bucket. Okay, I hope this video is helpful. Please leave a like, comment, and share the video, and also subscribe to my channel, okay, for more videos like this. Now in our next video, we're going to talk about Terraform lock, which is this file. The state file is in the S3. What about this lock? See you then.